A billionaire's mistress pushes his pregnant wife off a luxury yacht in front of 100 guests. The splash silences the music. The ocean becomes witness to attempted murder. But what happens next will shock you more than the push itself. Because the woman who sank into those dark waters did not just survive. She rose from the ocean and declared war on the people who tried to silence her. This is the true story of betrayal, survival, and a justice so cold it froze Miami to its core. Before we dive in, drop a comment below telling us what time you are watching from. And if you believe the truth always surfaces, hit that like button. You will not believe how this ends. Let us begin. The world turned silent underwater. Grace Winters Callahan sank through darkness, her white dress billowing around her like a ghost. 7 months pregnant, she fought against the weight pulling her down. Her lungs screamed. The baby kicked violently in sidebar, panicking as oxygen thinned. 20 minutes earlier, champagne had sparkled under Miami sunset. The yacht Serenity glided through calm waters while 100 guests celebrated Marcus Callahan's 38th birthday. Grace had stood near the railing, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching her husband laugh with his chief operating officer, watching him touch Vivian Cross's waist with casual possession. Everyone saw it. The investors, the business partners, the socialites with their phone cameras ready. Marcus and Vivian, inseparable all evening. Red silk against black tuxedo, his fingers lingering too long on her shoulder, her smile sharp as broken glass. Grace had approached slowly, her modest white dress flowing in the ocean breeze. She had loved the sea once. Before tonight, it had meant freedom. Now it felt like standing at the edge of something dark and final. "Happy birthday, Marcus," she had said quietly. Her husband turned, surprised. Guilt flickered across his face for just a moment before vanishing behind practiced charm. "Gracie, you should sit down. Dr. Morrison said you need rest." "I wanted to be here with you," Grace replied. Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. Vivian laughed, the sound carrying venom beneath sweetness. "How devoted. Though honestly, Marcus, she does look pale. Maybe she should rest before something happens." A few guests nearby chuckled nervously. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. The humiliation burned deeper than any physical wound. She turned to leave, but something inside her refused. Maybe it was the baby kicking beneath her ribs, reminding her she was not just a wife being dismissed, but a mother who needed to protect her child. "Marcus, can we talk privately?" Grace asked, her eyes glistening. Vivian stepped forward, blocking her path. "Let him enjoy his night, Isabella. Why ruin it with your drama?" "I am not talking to you, Grace said firmly. The music seemed to fade. Guests fell silent, sensing confrontation. Vivian tilted her head, red lips curving into something cruel. "You know, I used to feel sorry for you, but now I just think you are pathetic." Grace stared at her, speechless. The world narrowed until only Vivian's cold eyes remained visible. "Marcus belongs with me now," Vivian said softly, stepping closer. "You are just a chapter he forgot to close." The words cut through Grace like shattered glass. Her breath caught. Her balance wavered on the wet deck. "You do not know what love is," Grace whispered. Vivian leaned in, perfume heavy and sweet. "I know what winning looks like." Then it happened. In one swift, shocking motion, Vivian placed both hands on Grace's shoulders and pushed. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. Grace stumbled backward, heels scraping against slick wood. Her fingers reached desperately, catching nothing but air. The next second, her body hit cold water with a splash that silenced every conversation. Now, underwater, Grace fought against heavy fabric tangling around her legs. She could not swim well. Fear of drowning had haunted her since childhood. Salt burned her eyes and throat. She looked up through rippling darkness and saw Marcus's silhouette framed against dying sunlight. He just stood there, frozen, not jumping in, not shouting for help, just standing. The realization hit harder than the water. He is not coming for me. Her lungs burned. The baby kicked frantically. Grace's vision darkened at the edges. This is how I die, she thought. This is how we both die. Then strong arms wrapped around her chest. Someone had jumped in. A man's voice cut through her panic. Ma'am, I have got you. Stop fighting me. Derek Walsh, head of Yacht Security, hauled her toward the surface with powerful strokes. Grace broke through into air, choking and vomiting seawater. The world exploded in sound, shouting, crying, cameras flashing. Derek pulled her to the rescue ladder. Hands reached down, dragging her onto the deck. She collapsed, water pouring from her mouth and nose. Her entire body shook uncontrollably. "My baby," she gasped. "Please, my baby." A woman wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "You are safe now, sweetheart. Ambulance is coming." Through blurred vision, Grace saw Vivian standing near the railing. The woman was calmly straightening her hair, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. No fear, no concern, just cold satisfaction. Marcus finally moved, kneeling beside Grace. "Gracie, I am so sorry. I did not—" She pulled away from his touch, eyes blazing through tears. "Do not—" The yacht's captain announced through speakers they were returning to Marina immediately. Paramedics were waiting at the dock. Grace felt hands checking her pulse, shining lights in her eyes, pressing monitors against her belly to find the baby's heartbeat. One paramedic leaned close to his partner. Voice low, but Grace heard every word. "Possible placental abruption. We might lose the baby." Terror shot through her body. She tried to sit up, but hands gently pushed her back down. "Stay still, ma'am. We need to get you to the hospital." As they loaded her into the ambulance, Grace turned her head one last time. Through the vehicle's back window, she saw the yacht still glowing under darkening sky. Vivian stood beside Marcus now, whispering in his ear. He was nodding. They are already planning how to cover this up. Grace realized, they are going to say I slipped. The ambulance siren wailed into the night. Inside, Grace placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby move weakly beneath her palms. "Hold on," she whispered. "We are going to survive this, and then we are going to make them pay." She did not know then how long that fight would take, or how much it would cost her. She only knew that the woman who went into that water was gone forever. The woman who climbed out would be someone else entirely. Someone who refused to stay silent. Grace woke in a hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines. Fluorescent lights hurt her eyes. Dr. Helen Morrison stood beside her, checking the fetal monitor with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Callahan, can you hear me?" the doctor asked gently. Grace nodded, throat raw from seawater and screaming. "My baby. Heartbeat is there, but irregular. You are high risk now. Complete bed rest. No stress." "Doctor," Morrison paused. "You are very lucky to be alive." Lucky? The word felt like a joke. Grace turned her head toward the window, watching palm trees sway against bright morning sky. How long had she been unconscious? A knock sounded at the door. A man in his early 40s entered. Badge clipped to his belt, Detective Nathan Pierce. His eyes were kind but sharp, the look of someone who saw through lies for a living. "Mrs. Callahan, I am Detective Pierce. I need to ask you some questions about what happened on the yacht." He pulled a chair beside her bed. "But first, how are you feeling?" "Like I drowned," Grace said quietly. Pierce nodded, opening a small notebook. "I have reviewed security footage from guests' phones. 3 different people captured the incident. Can you tell me in your own words what happened?" Grace took a shaky breath and recounted everything. Vivian's cruel words, the deliberate push, Marcus standing frozen above the water. Her voice remained steady throughout, though her hands trembled. Pierce wrote rapidly, then showed her his phone. "I want you to watch this. Tell me if it matches your memory." The video played, grainy but clear enough. Vivian's hands striking Grace's shoulders. The splash, guests screaming, Marcus motionless at the railing. Grace watched her own near death from outside her body, detached and cold. "That is assault," Pierce said firmly. "Possibly attempted murder, given you were pregnant. With this evidence, well, we can charge her." For the first time since waking, Grace felt something like hope. "So it is over. She will be arrested." Pierce's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened. "I see. Thank you." He hung up, jaw tight. "Mrs. Callahan, there is a complication. The yacht's main security system was wiped clean. Someone with administrative access deleted all server footage. The hope died as quickly as it came. What does that mean?" "It means someone is covering this up, and they have resources." Pierce leaned forward, Who would have access to those systems? Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. Marcus owns the yacht. He would have full access. Pierce wrote that down, expression grim. Your husband is protecting the woman who tried to kill you. Ex-husband, Grace corrected. I want a divorce. Today. I can recommend an excellent attorney, Pierce said, handing her a business card. Rebecca Stone, she specializes in cases like yours. After Pierce left, Grace stared at the card. Rebecca Stone, criminal defense and family law. The letters blurred as tears filled her eyes. 7 months pregnant, nearly murdered, and now facing divorce from a man who chose his mistress over his wife and unborn child. A nurse brought her phone, pulled from the yacht before emergency transport. Grace scrolled through notifications. Hundreds of messages, thousands of social media mentions. The videos had gone viral, but the narrative was already shifting. News headlines scrolled across her screen. Yacht incident under investigation, and Callahan wife hospitalized after fall. Fall, not push. Fall. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the news. We are just getting started. Grace switched to a news website. The top story made her stomach drop. Sources close to Marcus Callahan suggest wife's mental health struggles may have contributed to yacht incident. The article continued with anonymous quotes. Grace has been hospitalized twice for anxiety in recent years. Friends say pregnancy hormones made her increasingly erratic and paranoid. She may have jumped intentionally to create a scene. Grace read in horror as they painted her as unstable, as attention-seeking, as the problem instead of the victim. Comment sections exploded with speculation. Half defended her. Half called her a gold digger trying to destroy a successful man. Her blood pressure monitor started beeping rapidly. Dr. Morrison rushed in. Mrs. Callahan, you need to calm down. Your pressure is dangerous for the baby. They are lying, Grace said, voice breaking. They are making me look crazy. No one will believe me now. I believe you, said a new voice from the doorway. A woman in her mid-40s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. Rebecca Stone. Detective Pierce called me. I came immediately. Rebecca sat on the edge of Grace's bed, voice firm but compassionate. Mrs. Callahan, they are going to try to destroy your credibility before you can destroy them. This is their strategy. Make you look unstable so when you accuse Vivian Cross of attempted murder, the public dismisses you as a hysterical pregnant woman. Grace wiped tears from her face. Then what do I do? You fight dirty, like they are. Rebecca pulled out an iPad. But first, you need to see something. She showed Grace bank records. Wire transfers from Marcus Callahan's personal account to several media outlets and gossip bloggers. The payments were made within hours of the yacht incident. $50,000, $20,000, $30,000. Grace stared at the numbers. He paid them to write those stories about me. Your husband chose to protect Vivian over you, over his own child. Rebecca's voice was steel. Now you need to choose yourself. Are you ready to fight? Grace looked at her reflection in the window, pale, exhausted, bruised. The old Grace would have backed down, would have stayed quiet to avoid making things worse. But the old Grace had drowned in that ocean. Yes, she said. I am ready. Rebecca smiled grimly. Good, because things are about to get much worse before they get better. Can you handle that? Grace placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick weakly. She thought about Vivian's cold eyes, Marcus's frozen face above the water, the lies already spreading across the internet. I can handle anything, Grace said quietly. I already survived drowning. What she did not know yet was that surviving the water would be the easiest part. The real drowning was just beginning. The divorce papers arrived 48 hours after Grace left the hospital. Marcus had moved faster than expected. Inside the envelope, a settlement offer so insulting it felt like another push. Rebecca read through the documents in Grace's temporary apartment. Eyebrows raised. He is offering you $500,000 for a marriage of 8 years to a billionaire and 0 parental rights negotiated. 500,000, Grace repeated numbly. We spent that on his birthday party. He is betting you will take it and disappear. Sign an NDA. Stay quiet about Vivian. Rebecca tossed the papers aside. We are going to do the opposite. File for full custody, half of marital assets, and sue Vivian Cross separately for assault and emotional distress. Grace looked around her new one-bedroom apartment. All her belongings had been removed from the penthouse she shared with Marcus and delivered here in boxes. He had erased her from his life within days. He really does not care, does he? She whispered. Men like Marcus care about one thing, power, and Vivian represents power to him right now. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expression darkening. Grace, turn on the news. Channel 7. Grace grabbed the remote. Her hands shook as the broadcast appeared. Marcus stood at a podium outside Callahan Holdings headquarters, microphones thrust toward his face. Vivian stood beside him in a modest navy dress, head bowed, looking fragile. I know there has been much speculation about what happened aboard my yacht, Marcus began, voice smooth and practiced. What occurred was a tragic accident. My wife slipped. Miss Cross tried to help her. The videos circulating online show a confused situation from limited angles. Reporters erupted with questions. Marcus raised his hands for silence. Grace has been under enormous stress lately. Pregnancy has been difficult for her, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes her reactions are not rational. He paused, manufactured concern on his face. The most important thing is that she and our baby are safe. We will handle everything else privately, as a family. Grace felt like she had been pushed off the yacht again. He was doing it, right there on national television, gaslighting her, making her the problem. Vivian lifted her head, dabbing fake tears from her eyes. I have been friends with Grace for years. I am devastated that she thinks I would ever hurt her. I pray she gets the help she needs. The screen cut to news anchors debating. Does Mrs. Callahan have a history of mental health issues? Is there truth to these pregnancy-related emotional struggles? We will discuss after the break. Grace turned off the television, hand over her mouth. She was going to be sick. Rebecca gripped her shoulder. This is exactly what I warned you about. They are rewriting the narrative. Everyone will believe them, Grace said, voice breaking. He is a billionaire. She is beautiful and successful. I am just some pregnant woman having a breakdown. No, Rebecca said firmly. You are a survivor, and we are going to prove it. But Grace barely heard her. She was drowning again, only this time in lies instead of water. Her phone exploded with notifications. People she considered friends were posting vague, supportive messages, sending prayers to Marcus during this difficult time. Hope Grace gets the mental health support she needs. Not one person asked for her side of the story. That afternoon, Sarah Mitchell appeared at Grace's door. The investigative journalist was 31, sharp-eyed, carrying a thick folder. Mrs. Callahan, I am Sarah Mitchell from the Miami Tribune. Can I come in? Grace almost said no, but something in Sarah's expression was different from other reporters. Not hungry for gossip, hungry for truth. Inside, Sarah spread documents across Grace's coffee table. Vivian Cross is not who she claims to be. That is not even her real name. Grace leaned forward. What? Boston, 2019. She was Elena Vance. Had an affair with a married CEO named Richard Sullivan. His wife suffered a mysterious fall down the stairs. Hospitalized. Nearly died. Case settled out of court with NDAs. The wife received $10 million and disappeared from public life. Sarah pulled out a photo, different hair color, different style, but the same cold eyes. Vivian. She has done this before. Grace breathed. Twice more that I can confirm. Different cities, different names. Each time the wife had an accident. Each time the case was buried with money. Sarah looked at Grace intently. You are the first one fighting back. Grace's doorbell rang. She opened it to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway. Grace Winters Callahan, one asked. Yes. You are under arrest for filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. The world tilted. What? No, man, I did not. Rebecca appeared from the kitchen. Officers, I am her attorney. On what grounds are you arresting my client? Mr. Marcus Callahan and Miss Vivian Cross have provided evidence that Mrs. Callahan jumped intentionally to frame Miss Cross. Security footage analysis and witness testimony support their claim. As the officers read Grace her rights and placed handcuffs around her wrists, She looked at Rebecca in disbelief. They are arresting me. I am the victim. I know, Rebecca said, voice tight with fury. This is Marcus playing his power card. But do not say anything. Not one word until we are at the station. Neighbors opened doors, filming on phones. Grace, 7 months pregnant, was walked out in handcuffs. The shame and humiliation threatened to break her completely. This was her third descent into drowning. First the ocean, then the lies. Now this. In the police car, Grace closed her eyes and felt the baby kick. She placed her cuffed hands on her belly and made a silent promise: they will not win. No matter what it takes, we will survive this. But she had no idea yet how much worse things would get. Detective Pierce sat across from Grace in the interrogation room. Rebecca Stone beside her, hand on her arm in warning. Do not speak without my approval. Mrs. Callahan, I know you did not jump, Pierce said quietly. I have seen the footage from every angle. Grace blinked. Yes. Then why am I here? Pierce leaned back, glancing at the two-way mirror. Because I need Marcus and Vivian to feel safe, to feel like they won. People get sloppy when they think they are untouchable. Understanding Dawn. You are using me as bait. I am giving you a chance to catch them confessing on record. Pierce slid a piece of paper across the table. I can get you released on bail within an hour, but I need something from you first. Rebecca read the document, eyebrows raised. You want her to wear a wire and confront Marcus. If she is willing, Pierce said, looking at Grace, get him to admit they covered it up. Admit he deleted the yacht footage. Anything that proves conspiracy and obstruction. Grace thought about Marcus standing frozen while she drowned, about the smear campaign destroying her reputation, about being arrested in front of her neighbors while 7 months pregnant. What happens if he finds the wire, she asked. We will be close by. You will be safe. No one has kept me safe so far, Grace said bitterly. Pierce's expression softened. You are right, and I am sorry. But this is the only way to bring them both down. The phone videos show the push, but not enough to prove intent. We need their confession. Grace looked at Rebecca, who nodded slowly. It is risky, but it might be our only shot at real justice. If I do this, I want full immunity, Grace said. No false report charges, nothing on my record, and I want witness protection if they retaliate. Pierce extended his hand. Deal. 2 days later, Grace sat on a park bench overlooking the bay. Sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wire pressed against her collarbone, hidden beneath her loose sweater. Detective Pierce and 2 officers waited in a van 50 yards away. Her phone buzzed. Marcus had agreed to meet. She saw him approaching, looking thinner than before. Guilt and exhaustion etched into his face. He sat beside her, maintaining distance. Grace, I am sorry you got arrested. That was not supposed to happen. What was supposed to happen? Marcus, she asked softly. When you stood there watching me drown, I panicked. His voice cracked. I know that sounds pathetic, but it is true, When Vivian pushed you, I just froze. And then when you were in the ambulance, Vivian said if the story got out wrong, we would lose everything, the company, the investors, all of it. Grace felt sick. So you chose money over me. I chose wrong. Marcus turned to look at her, tears in his eyes. I see that now. But Vivian has leverage on me. Grace, financial crimes from the Singapore deal. If I turn on her, I go to prison too. Then go to the police, tell them everything, testify against her. I cannot. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. She has documentation of money laundering, tax evasion, offshore accounts. If I talk, I am finished. Grace was about to respond when she saw movement behind Marcus. Vivian appeared, casually eating an ice cream cone, as if happening upon them by chance. How touching, Vivian said, sitting on Marcus's other side. The reunion. Grace's heart raced. This was not the plan. Vivian was not supposed to be here. You tried to kill me, Grace said, voice steady despite her fear. Vivian laughed. Prove it. Oh, wait, you cannot, because the evidence is gone. She leaned forward, eyes glittering. And even if you had proof, who would believe a hysterical pregnant woman over me? Her gaze dropped to Grace's necklace, the delicate silver chain with a small pendant that hid the recording device. Vivian's eyes narrowed. That is new jewelry. Grace, when did you get that? Grace's blood went cold. It was my grandmother's. Really, though? Vivian reached out fast, yanking the necklace. The chain She held the pendant up to the fading light, examining it. This looks like a recording device. Vivian, wait, Marcus started. Vivian crushed the device under her heel. You bitch! You tried to set us up! She lunged at Grace, hands striking her face. Grace fell from the bench, arms wrapped around her belly. Vivian stood over her, screaming, You think you can outsmart me? I have destroyed better women than you. Marcus finally moved, grabbing Vivian's arm. Stop, she is pregnant. I do not care. Vivian wrenched free, kicking at Grace's side. Detective Pierce and 2 officers appeared, running toward them. Police hands where I can see them. Vivian fought against the officers as they restrained her. She attacked me. This is entrapment. Pierce knelt beside Grace, helping her sit up. Her face was already swelling from the slap. Are you hurt? Did she hit your stomach? No, Grace gasped. Just my face. Pierce stood, looking at Vivian with cold satisfaction. We got enough before she found the wire. The confession about deleted evidence, the leverage, all of it. He turned to Marcus, who stood frozen again. Mr. Callahan, you want to make a statement? Marcus looked at Grace, holding her bruised face, 7 months pregnant and hurt again because of him. Something broke in his expression. The calculation, the self-preservation, all of it crumbled. Yes, he said quietly. I will tell you everything. Marcus sat in the interrogation room, lawyer present but silent. Detective Pierce recorded as Marcus detailed everything, deleting the yacht security footage within an hour of the incident, paying media outlets and bloggers to publish stories questioning Grace's mental health, pressuring witnesses not to cooperate with police. I knew it was wrong, Umberto, Marcus said, voice hollow. But Vivian has evidence of financial crimes I committed. Offshore accounts to avoid taxes, money laundering through shell companies for the Singapore development deal. If she goes down, she takes me with her. So you chose to protect your criminal mistress over your pregnant wife, Pierce said flatly. Marcus flinched. I chose to protect myself, and I am ashamed of that. Did you know Vivian planned to push Grace off the yacht? No, I swear I did not. But when it happened, and I saw Grace in the water, I did not jump in. I just stood there. His voice broke. What kind of man does that? The kind that does not deserve forgiveness. Grace thought from behind the two-way mirror. She watched her husband confess to betrayals she had not even known about. Financial crimes, intentional cover-ups, years of lies. Rebecca stood beside her. This is enough to charge him as an accessory after the fact. He is going to prison too. Good, Grace said coldly. They arrested Marcus that night. Photographers caught him leaving the police station in handcuffs. The billionaire who once controlled everything now powerless. The media exploded. Within hours, the narrative shifted completely. Billionaire Marcus Callahan arrested for obstruction of justice. Wife pusher Vivian Cross charged with attempted murder. Pregnant victim was right all along. Grace's phone overflowed with apologies from people who had doubted her. Friends who had believed Marcus's lies now sent flowers and tearful voice messages. The same comment sections that called her crazy now praised her bravery. But Grace felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just exhaustion so deep it reached her bones. Todd Brennan, Marcus's former best friend and business partner, showed up at Grace's apartment carrying coffee and remorse. I should have given the police my footage immediately, Todd said, sitting across from her. I filmed the sunset from the yacht, caught everything. Vivian's face before the push. It was calculated, cold. I knew it was not an accident. Why did you wait? Grace asked. Because Marcus was my friend, my business partner. I thought loyalty meant protecting him. Todd looked ashamed. But real loyalty means stopping your friends from doing evil things. I am sorry, Grace. You did eventually come forward, she said, but that counts for something. Todd handed her a folder. Marcus signed over his parental rights. He knows he does not deserve to be a father to your child. Everything in this folder is the divorce settlement Rebecca negotiated. $50 million, dollars, the Miami penthouse, full custody, no contest. Grace stared at the numbers. More money than she could spend in a lifetime, but it felt hollow. This does not fix anything. No, Todd agreed, but it gives you options to rebuild. That evening, Dr. Helen Morrison came for a home visit. She checked Grace's blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and frowned. Physically, you and the baby are surviving, but emotionally, Grace, you are drowning. Have you thought about therapy? I do not have time for therapy. I have a trial to prepare for. The trial will not matter if stress kills you or the baby first. Dr. Morrison sat beside her. PTSD is real. Nearly dying is traumatic. Being gaslit and arrested is traumatic. You cannot just push through this. Grace looked away. If I stop moving, I will fall apart. Then let yourself fall apart. In a safe place with professional help. Strength is not pretending you are fine. Strength is admitting you are broken and asking for help. It was the first time anyone had given Grace permission to not be okay. The tears came suddenly, months of terror and pain finally breaking through. Dr. Morrison held her while she sobbed. Ugly and raw. All the composure finally shattered. When Grace could breathe again, she whispered, I cannot take baths anymore. I can only shower, and I have to keep my eyes open. I wake up feeling like I am drowning. Every night. That is PTSD, Dr. Morrison said gently, and it is treatable. Will you let me help you? Grace nodded, because Dr. Morrison was right. She had survived drowning, lies, and betrayal. But surviving was not the same as living, and she wanted to live again, for herself and for the baby who still kicked steadily beneath her heart. 6 months later, Grace walked into the courthouse carrying her 3-month-old son. She had named him Daniel. It meant God is my judge, and felt appropriate given everything she had endured. The trial had been delayed by Marcus's confession negotiations and Vivian's legal maneuvering. But now, finally, justice would be served publicly. Vivian sat at the defense table in a cream-colored suit, hair pulled back severely, looking nothing like the woman in red silk who had pushed Grace into the ocean. Her lawyer, a sharp man in his 50s, was one of the best money could buy. Marcus sat in the gallery, no longer a defendant but a witness. He had pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and agreed to testify against Vivian in exchange for a reduced sentence. 8 years instead of 15. Grace took the stand first. Rebecca had prepared her for this moment. Answer clearly. Do not show too much emotion or they will call you hysterical. Do not show too little or they will say you are lying. The prosecutor was a woman named Margaret Foster, mid-40s, with a reputation for destroying defense arguments. Mrs. Winters, can you describe what happened on the yacht? Margaret began. Grace recounted everything. Vivian's cruel words, the calculated push, Marcus frozen above the water, drowning while her baby kicked frantically inside her. She kept her voice steady, professional, though her hands trembled in her lap. Margaret played the phone videos for the jury. 12 faces watching Vivian's hands strike Grace's shoulders, watching the splash, watching Marcus do nothing. Several jurors looked horrified. What did you think in that moment when you realized your husband was not coming to save you? Margaret asked. Grace met the jury's eyes. I thought he chose her over us, and I thought if I survive this, I will never let anyone make me powerless again. Vivian's lawyer cross-examined aggressively. Is it not true, Mrs. Winters, that you were hospitalized twice for anxiety before this incident? Yes, Grace answered calmly. After my mother died and again after a miscarriage, grief and loss are not the same as mental instability. But you were on medication for depression. I was. Depression is a medical condition, not a character flaw. I sought help, which is the responsible thing to do. The lawyer tried to rattle her, suggesting she had jumped for attention, that pregnancy hormones made her irrational, that she was jealous of Vivian's success. But Grace remained steady. Therapy had helped her prepare for this. She knew who she was now. When Derek Walsh took the stand, he described pulling Grace's unconscious body from the water. She was blue, not breathing right. Another minute and she might have died. He showed the jury photos of Grace's injuries, handprint-shaped bruises on her shoulders, evidence of deliberate force. Todd Brennan showed his phone footage. The camera had caught Vivian's face before the push. Cold, calculating, no surprise, no accident, premeditation. The jury watched Vivian lean close to Grace and whisper something, then watched her hands strike. Several jurors looked at Vivian with visible disgust. Marcus took the stand last. He looked older, grayer, defeated. "Mr. Callahan, did you see Miss Cross push your wife off the yacht?" Margaret asked. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "And what did you do?" "Nothing. I stood there." His voice cracked. "I was in shock. And then I was calculating how to protect the company. I chose wrong." "Did you later delete security footage from the yacht?" "Yes." "Did you pay media outlets to publish false stories about your wife's mental health?" "Yes." Marcus's hands shook. "I was trying to protect Vivian because she had leverage over me, but really I was just protecting myself, and I destroyed the best person I ever knew." He looked at Grace into the gallery. She looked away. "No further questions," Margaret said. Vivian's lawyer called character witnesses, claiming she was kind and generous. They showed her charity work, her business success, her glowing performance reviews, but it all felt empty compared to the videos showing her push a pregnant woman into the ocean. When Vivian took the stand, she maintained innocence. Grace slipped. "I tried to grab her arm but missed. I have been vilified for something that was a tragic accident." But Margaret destroyed her on cross-examination. "Miss Cross, is your real name Elena Vance?" Vivian's face went pale. "I legally changed my name after a similar incident in Boston where a married CEO's wife fell downstairs and nearly died." "Correct. That was an accident too." "3 similar accidents with 3 different men's wives." Margaret's voice dripped skepticism. "That is quite a pattern, Miss Cross." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault on a pregnant woman, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant guilty." Vivian collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Real tears now, not the fake ones she had displayed for cameras. Her lawyer tried to comfort her, but she was inconsolable. Judge Patricia Howard sentenced her immediately. "Miss Cross, your actions endangered 2 lives for personal gain. You have shown no remorse and demonstrated a pattern of harming women who stood between you and what you wanted. I sentence you to 15 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Vivian screamed as officers led her away. "This is wrong. She set me up. You are all making a mistake." Marcus's sentencing came next week. 8 years, eligible for parole in 4. He accepted it without argument. Outside the courthouse, Grace stood before a crowd of reporters and supporters. Sarah Mitchell was among them, the journalist who had helped expose Vivian's past. "Mrs. Winters, how do you feel?" Sarah asked. Grace looked at baby Daniel sleeping in her arm. Relieved, exhausted, and ready to start healing. "What is next for you?" "I am starting a foundation, the Winters Foundation for Domestic Violence Survivors, using the divorce settlement to help women escape dangerous situations, get legal support, and rebuild their lives." The crowd applauded, but as Grace walked to her car, the weight of everything pressed down on her. Justice had been served. The villains were imprisoned. She had won. So why did she still feel like she was drowning? 3 months after the trial, Grace stood in front of a renovated building near the Miami waterfront. The sign above the entrance read, "The Winters Foundation," in elegant silver letters. Volunteers and reporters gathered for the opening ceremony. Grace had poured herself into this work. If her pain could help even one woman escape an abusive situation, then everything she survived would have meaning. The foundation offered legal assistance, counseling, safe housing, and job placement for domestic violence survivors. "My name is Grace Winters," she began, voice steady despite cameras pointing at her. "I almost died because a powerful man chose to protect his mistress over his wife. I was gaslit, arrested, and nearly lost my child because people with money thought they could rewrite the truth. But I survived, and I want every woman who feels powerless to know you are not alone. Your story matters, and we will fight beside you." The crowd applauded, Several women in the audience were crying. Grace recognized them from support group meetings. Each had their own story of betrayal and survival. After the ceremony, Detective Nathan Pierce approached. "This is good work you are doing. Thank you for everything you did to help me." Pierce nodded. "Vivian's appeal was denied this morning. She is going to serve the full sentence." Grace felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was hollow. Vivian in prison did not erase the trauma. Marcus serving 8 years did not heal the betrayal. Justice was important, but it was not the same as peace that night. Grace sat in her small coastal apartment, far from Miami's glamorous neighborhoods. Baby Daniel slept in his crib nearby. Grace stared at the ocean visible through her window. She had not been in water since that night, not even a bath. The sound of waves still triggered panic attacks. Dr. Morrison said the PTSD might never fully disappear. Some traumas leave permanent marks. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Derek Walsh, the security guard who had saved her life. He held coffee and wore a tentative smile. "I hope this is not weird," Derek said. "I just wanted to check on you, see how you are doing." "Come in," Grace said, grateful for company that did not ask anything from her. They sat on the small balcony, watching the ocean. Derek had left yacht security work after the trial, unable to work in an industry that had enabled Vivian and Marcus's cover-up. He now trained emergency responders. "Do you ever regret it?" Derek asked. "Fighting back. It would have been easier to take the money and disappear." Grace considered this. "Easier, yes, but I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I was crazy, if what happened was really my fault. Fighting back gave me my sanity, even if it cost me my peace." Derek nodded. "You saved a lot of women by exposing Vivian's pattern. The Boston victim came forward again after your trial. So did 2 others. They are getting justice now because you refused to stay silent." Grace had not known that. She felt tears prick her eyes. "That makes it worth it." They sat in comfortable silence. Daniel woke, crying softly. Grace excused herself to feed him. As she held her son, watching his tiny hands grasp at air, she thought about the different ways people drown. Some drown in water, some in lies, some in their own fear. Grace had drowned in all 3 and clawed her way back to air each time. She was not the same woman she had been before the yacht. That woman was gone forever, but maybe the woman she became was stronger. A week later, Grace received a letter forwarded from the prison, Marcus's handwriting on the envelope. She almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was 2 pages. Marcus detailed his remorse, his therapy sessions in prison, his understanding of how badly he had failed her. He said he signed away parental rights because Daniel deserved better than a father who had proven himself morally bankrupt. "I do not expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I do not deserve it, but I need you to know that every day I wake up in here, I think about that night, about standing frozen while you drowned. I chose money over love, power over integrity, and I lost everything that mattered. You were always the strongest person I knew. I just never saw it until I destroyed you. I am sorry." Grace read the letter twice, then burned it in her kitchen sink. Words were cheap. Marcus had his whole life to show her who he was, and he had shown her clearly. Sorry did not rebuild trust. Sorry did not erase trauma. But as she watched the paper curl into ash, she realized something: she did not need his apology to move forward. His guilt was his burden to carry, not hers. That revelation felt like breaking through water's surface one more time, gasping but alive. Grace started therapy twice a week, and Dr. Catherine Pierce specialized in trauma and PTSD. The sessions were brutal. Grace had to relive the drowning, the gaslighting, the arrest. She had to confront how Marcus's betrayal had shattered her ability to trust anyone. "You are not broken," Dr. Pierce said during one session. "You are a person who experienced terrible things and reacted normally to abnormal circumstances." "Then why do I still panic when I hear running water?" Grace asked, frustrated. "Why do I check the locks 5 times before bed? Why can I not sleep without nightmares?" "Because trauma changes your brain. It puts you in constant survival mode. We are going to work on teaching your nervous system that you are safe now." It was slow work. Some days, Grace felt like she was making progress. Other days, a car backfiring would send her into a panic attack, hand clutching her chest as she fought to breathe. Those days, she wondered if she would ever feel normal again. The foundation kept her busy. They had helped 40 women in the first 3 months, provided legal representation for 12 custody cases, secured safe housing for 15 families. Grace threw herself into the work, finding purpose in transforming her pain into something useful. But late at night, alone with her thoughts, Grace struggled with a question she could not answer. Would she ever be able to trust someone again? Would she ever believe a man's words without waiting for betrayal? Derek had become a regular presence in her life. He stopped by with coffee every week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. He never pushed for more, never asked for anything beyond friendship. One evening, as they watched Daniel crawl across the living room floor, Derek said, "You know you do not have to do everything alone, right?" Grace smiled sadly. "I do not know how to not be alone anymore." "That is okay. There is no timeline for healing. Just know that when you are ready, some people are worth trusting again." She looked at him. This man who had jumped into the ocean without hesitation to save a stranger, who had testified at trial despite pressure to stay silent, who showed up week after week with no expectation of anything in return. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me as more than just a victim." "You were never just a victim," Derek replied. "Even when you were drowning, you were fighting. That is who you are." 6 months after the trial, Grace received an email from Sarah Mitchell, the journalist who had exposed Vivian's past. Sarah was writing a book about the case and wanted Grace to contribute. The working title was "The Woman Who Refused to Drown." Grace agreed to maybe telling her story fully would help other women recognize the warning signs. Maybe it would prevent another Marcus from choosing power over love, another Vivian from hurting someone vulnerable. The book came out a year later and became a bestseller. Grace appeared on morning shows and podcasts, always emphasizing the same message: staying silent protects the guilty. Speaking up saves lives. But despite the success, despite the foundation's growth, despite Daniel's healthy development, Grace still struggled. The trauma had changed her permanently. She was more cautious, more guarded, more aware of how quickly everything could fall apart. One afternoon, Dr. Pierce asked a difficult question. "Grace, what does healing look like to you? What would make you feel like you have moved past this?" Grace thought for a long time. "I do not think I will ever move past it. This is part of who I am now. But maybe healing looks like being able to go near the ocean without my heart racing. Maybe it looks like trusting someone enough to let them close. Maybe it is just waking up one day and realizing I went a whole day without thinking about that night." "Those are good goals," Dr. Pierce said. "Small, achievable steps toward a larger peace." That weekend, Derek invited Grace to bring Daniel to the beach. "Just to the shore," he said. "You do not have to go in the water, but maybe standing near it will help." Grace's first instinct was to refuse, but she thought about Daniel growing up afraid because his mother was afraid. She thought about how fear had taken enough from her already. "Okay," she agreed, "but you stay close." They went at sunset, the same time of day when Vivian had pushed her. Grace's hands shook as they walked across the sand. The sound of waves crashing made her breath catch. But Derek held Daniel in one arm and offered his other hand to Grace. She took it. They walked to where water met sand. Grace stood there, Daniel giggling at the foam, and forced herself to breathe. The ocean had nearly killed her, but it had also taught her how strong she was. "I am still here," she whispered to the waves. "You did not win." Derek squeezed her hand. "No, you did." It was not a fairy tale ending. Grace still had nightmares, still checked locks obsessively, still could not fully trust. But she was learning that survival was not the same as living. And slowly, painfully, she was learning to do both. 2 years after the yacht incident, Grace sat in the visiting room at the women's correctional facility. She had not planned to come here, had sworn she never would, but her therapist suggested facing Vivian might bring closure. Vivian entered wearing prison orange, looking smaller somehow. 2 years inside had stripped away the glamour. No red silk dress, no perfect makeup, just a woman aging badly under fluorescent lights. They sat across from each other, a guard nearby. Vivian would not meet Grace's eyes. "Why did you do it?" Grace asked quietly. "Just tell me why." Vivian laughed bitterly. You really do not understand. Do you women like you have everything handed to you and pretty, married to a billionaire, pregnant with his child? You were living my dream life and you did not even appreciate it. So you tried to kill me. I tried to take what should have been mine. Vivian finally looked up, eyes hard. Marcus was supposed to be mine. The company was supposed to be mine. But you were in the way. Always the perfect wife. Always making him feel guilty. Grace stared at her, looking for remorse, finding none. You destroyed 3 women's lives before me. 4 if you count yourself. And you still think you are the victim. I am a victim, Vivian insisted. A victim of a world that tells women the only way to power is through men. I was smarter than Marcus, more strategic, better at business. But because I did not have a rich daddy to give me a company, I had to take it. You could have built your own company, your own success. Vivian smiled coldly. And spend 20 years working my way up. No, I found a faster way. Seduce men with power, remove their ways, step into the life they built. It worked 3 times before you. Grace felt sick. You are not a victim. You are a predator who targets women because you see us as obstacles instead of people. Maybe, Vivian said. But you know what is funny? You became just like me. Took Marcus for everything he had, used your trauma to build an empire. You are just better at hiding behind righteousness. The words hit like a slap. Grace stood, hands shaking. I help women escape situations like the one you put me in. That is not the same. Keep telling yourself that, Vivian called as Grace walked away. But you and I both know power is power, no matter how you get it. Grace left the prison shaking. The visit had not brought closure. It had opened new wounds. Was Vivian right? Had Grace become ruthless in her pursuit of justice? Had survival turned her into something hard and calculating? That night, she called Dr. Pierce in crisis. But what if I am not the hero of this story? What if I am just another person using pain as an excuse for power? Grace, listen to me, Dr. Pierce said firmly. Vivian is a textbook narcissist. She is trying to make you doubt yourself because that is how people like her maintain control. You did not take from Marcus to hurt him. You took what was legally yours after he betrayed you, and you are using that money to help vulnerable people. That is not the same as targeting and hurting innocent women. But I feel so angry all the time, so hard. I am not the soft person I used to be. Trauma changes us. You are not supposed to be the same person you were before you nearly died. But hardness is not the same as cruelty. Strength is not the same as predation. You have every right to be angry. You have every right to protect yourself. That does not make you Vivian, Grace cried, releasing months of doubt and guilt. She had been carrying shame for surviving, shame for fighting back, shame for not being the forgiving, graceful victim people wanted her to be. You do not owe anyone your softness, Dr. Pierce continued, especially not the people who tried to destroy you. The words settled into Grace's bones. She was not Vivian. She had not targeted innocent people. She had defended herself, and there was nothing wrong with being a woman who refused to be destroyed quietly. The next morning, Grace received a call from Rebecca Stone. Marcus is up for parole, 4 years instead of 8. Grace's stomach dropped. Already. He has been a model prisoner, completed therapy, taught business classes to other inmates. The parole board is sympathetic. Rebecca paused. You have the right to appear at his hearing, to make a statement. Grace thought about Marcus's letter, his apology, his guilt. She thought about Daniel, now 2 years old, who would never know his biological father. She thought about how forgiveness was supposed to make you feel lighter, but sometimes just made you feel hollow. I will be there, she said. The parole hearing was small and bureaucratic. Marcus sat in prison blues, thinner and grayer. His father Ethan sat in the gallery, the old man's disappointment still visible after 4 years. Grace sat across from Marcus as she read her prepared statement. Marcus Callahan stood frozen while I drowned. He chose to protect the woman who tried to kill me because it was convenient. He gaslit me, paid people to destroy my reputation, had me arrested while I was pregnant and traumatized. He did all of this to protect himself. She paused, looking at Marcus directly. But he also confessed. Eventually, He cooperated with prosecutors. He signed away parental rights because he knew he did not deserve to be a father. So I am not here to tell you to keep him in prison. I am here to tell you that if you release him, he will have to live every day knowing that when it mattered most, he failed every test of character, and that is a prison he will never escape. The parole board granted his release. Marcus would be free within 30 days. As they left the building, Marcus caught up to Grace. "Can I just say no, sir?" Grace cut him off. "You do not get to ease your guilt with more apologies. You made your choices. Now live with them." She walked away, Daniel on her hip, and did not look back. 4 years after the yacht incident, Grace stood on a beach at sunrise. Not in Miami, but in a small coastal town in South Carolina where she had moved to escape the publicity. Daniel, now 4 years old, played in the shallow water, completely unafraid. Grace watched him splash and laugh. She had spent 3 years in intensive therapy learning to be near the ocean again. It was still hard. Some days, the sound of waves sent her heart racing, but she had refused to let fear dictate her life anymore. Derek walked up beside her, carrying coffee. They had been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly. Grace still struggled with trust, with letting anyone close. But Derek was patient. He understood that healing was not linear. "You okay?" he asked, watching her face. "Yeah," she said, and meant it. "I am okay." The foundation had expanded to 5 cities. They had helped over 1,000 women escape domestic violence situations. Grace spent her days training volunteers, fundraising, and speaking at universities about recognizing abuse patterns. The work was exhausting and healing in equal measure. Marcus had been released from prison and immediately left Miami. Grace heard through mutual acquaintances that he was working construction in Montana under a different name, trying to rebuild a life far from the empire he had lost. She felt nothing about this news. No satisfaction, no bitterness, just nothing. He was a stranger who had briefly shared her life and then destroyed it. Vivian still had 6 years left on her sentence. Sarah Mitchell had published a follow-up book exposing 8 more women who came forward with stories about Vivian's pattern. She would likely die in prison, forgotten by the world that once admired her beauty and ambition. Grace's phone rang. Rebecca Stone was calling with news. The Boston victim just won her civil suit, $10 million in damages. She credited your trial with giving her courage to reopen her case. Grace smiled. "That is good. That is really good." When she hung up, Derek asked, "Everything okay?" "Better than okay. We are winning slowly, but we are winning." Daniel ran up, soaking wet and covered in sand. "Mommy, come play." Grace hesitated. The old fear rose in her chest, but she looked at her son's bright eyes, full of trust and joy, and made a choice. She kicked off her shoes and walked into the shallow water. The cold shocked her system. Her breath caught, but she forced herself to stand still, waves lapping at her ankles. Daniel grabbed her hand, jumping over foam, and slowly, painfully, Grace began to breathe normally. Derek waded in beside them, creating a barrier between Grace and deeper water. Always protective, always patient. Grace leaned into him, letting herself accept support for the first time in years. That evening, Grace recorded a video for the Foundation's social media. She had avoided cameras since the trial ended, preferring to work behind the scenes. But her therapist encouraged her to reclaim her narrative one final time. "My name is Grace Winters," she began. "4 years ago, I was pushed off a yacht by my husband's mistress. I nearly died. Then I was gaslit, arrested, and almost lost my baby. People told me to stay quiet, to take the money and disappear, to stop making trouble for powerful people." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I refused. And yes, fighting back cost me. I have PTSD. I do not trust easily anymore. I am harder than I used to be. Some people think that makes me damaged, but I think it makes me realistic. Trauma changes you. There is no going back to who you were before. You can only move forward as who you have become." Grace looked directly at the camera. "If you are drowning right now, in violence or lies or someone else's version of your story, I want you to know this: staying silent protects the guilty. Speaking up saves lives. Your story matters. Your safety matters. and you are stronger than the people trying to destroy you." She ended the video. It went viral within hours. Millions of views. Thousands of comments from women sharing their own stories. Grace read through them late into the night, crying at the solidarity and strength in each testimony. The universal dilemma she had faced. The question every abuse victim struggles with, do I stay quiet to keep peace or speak up and face consequences, had resonated across the world. Women everywhere understood that drowning, and now they were choosing to breathe. A week later, Grace did something she had been avoiding for 4 years. She wrote a letter to herself, to the woman she used to be, before the yacht, before the drowning, before everything shattered. "Dear Grace," she wrote, "I am sorry I could not protect you. I am sorry Marcus betrayed you. I am sorry Vivian hurt you. I am sorry the world did not believe you at first. But I am not sorry you fought back. I am not sorry you refused to disappear. You saved yourself. You saved our son. You saved hundreds of other women by refusing to be silent. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing you ever did." She folded the letter and placed it in a box with all the others she had written in therapy. Letters to Marcus she never sent. Letters to Vivian expressing rage and pain. Letters to the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming. Each one a step toward peace. That night, Grace dreamed of the ocean. But for the first time in 4 years, it was not a nightmare. She dreamed of floating on calm water, sun warm on her face, completely safe. When she woke, the memory of the dream stayed with her. Not drowning, just floating. At peace, it was not a fairy tale ending. Grace still had hard days, still attended therapy, still double-checked locks and flinched at loud sounds. But she had learned something important. You do not have to be healed to be whole. You do not have to forget to move forward. You just have to keep breathing. 3 years later, Derek proposed. Grace said yes, but insisted on a long engagement. Marriage felt terrifying after Marcus, but Derek understood. He had loved her long enough to know that patience was the greatest gift he could offer. Daniel started first grade, confident and kind. Grace made sure he grew up knowing his mother's story. Not the sanitized version, but the truth. She wanted him to understand that strength sometimes looks like survival, that speaking truth to power matters, that women deserve to be believed. On the anniversary of the yacht incident, Grace returned to Miami for the first time in years. She stood at the marina where it had all happened, watching yachts drift past. The Serenity had been sold and renamed. The dock looked different, but the ocean remained the same. Grace took a deep breath and whispered to the water, "You tried to kill me, but I am still here. I am still breathing, and I am finally learning to swim again." The waves crashed in response, endless and indifferent. But Grace was no longer afraid. She had drowned and come back. She had faced the worst people could do and survived. And now, standing on solid ground with the sun on her face, she understood something profound. The strongest people are not those who never fall. They are the ones who fall, break apart, and still find a way to stand again. They are the ones who turn their pain into purpose, who refuse to let trauma have the final word. Grace Winters had drowned in the ocean, in lies, in betrayal, and in her own fear. But she had also learned something powerful. Every time you break the surface and gasp for air, you prove you are stronger than the water that tried to claim you. She walked away from the marina, toward Derek and Daniel waiting in the car, toward the foundation that helped thousands of women breathe again, toward a future she had built from the wreckage of her past. The woman who went into the water that night had died. But the woman who climbed out was someone better, someone who knew her worth, someone who would never drown again. And that, Grace thought as she drove away from the ocean, was not a tragedy. It was a triumph.